The title of this talk is a quotation from Century of Light, The History of the 20th Century, written under the supervision of the Universal House of Justice and commended by them for our thoughtful study. And the talk itself will be a series of quotations linked by commentary to draw out the connections. To begin, here is a quotation from the outstanding economist Joan Robinson. The purpose of studying economics is not to acquire a set of ready-made answers to economic questions, but to learn how to avoid being deceived by economists. Now, with apologies to any professional economists here. Now, if Baha'u'llah's cause has revolutionary social implications, if he has come to roll up the old world order, it stands to reason that systems of thought that support and justify that are not guiding us to the truth. Mainstream economics is certainly such a system, and hence it serves to deceive people, as Robinson stated. In essence, economic orthodoxy could be caricatured as neoclassical theory, which argues that the economy will produce the best outcomes for society if markets are left to operate freely, without regulation or government interference, and with the lowest possible government activity and therefore minimal taxation. Overly brief, but let's press on. I'm going to examine two paragraphs in Century of Light, sentence by sentence, to draw out the profound revolutionary implications. The first sentence is, in the perspective of Baha'u'llah's teachings, the greatest danger of both the moral crisis and the inequities associated with globalization in its current form is an entrenched philosophical attitude that seeks to justify and excuse these failures. The preceding paragraphs describe the phenomena of globalization and the corresponding anti-globalization movements. The document doesn't discuss the rights and wrongs of this debate. Rather, with this sentence, the House cuts through all the noise to the heart of the matter. So far as globalization might be perceived to have negative effects, the real danger is in the philosophical attitude that seeks to justify these failings. And by definition, free market economics always serves to justify inequity. It explicitly states that whatever outcome is achieved by free markets is the best that could have been achieved, even if it appears highly iniquitous. The document continues. The overthrow of the 20th century's totalitarian systems has not meant the end of ideology. On the contrary, there has not been a society in the history of the world, no matter how pragmatic, experimentalist, and multiform it may have been, that did not derive its thrust from some foundational interpretation of reality. Ideology has become a dirty word, implying dogmatic inflexibility. But here, the House is pointing out that we all have some set of beliefs and values that guides the way we see the world. As Baha'is, we should be striving to ensure that our beliefs and values are founded on Baha'u'llah's revelation, to be conscious of our own worldview and bring it into conformity with the teachings. This brings to mind a famous quotation from economist John Maynard Keynes. Practical men who believe themselves to be exempt from any intellectual inferences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. We will come back to these defunct economists in a minute. For now, let's get back to Century of Light. The passage continues with this striking statement. Such a system of thought reigns today virtually unchallenged across the planet, under the nominal designation Western civilization. Appreciation of the benefits cannot withhold a thinking person from recognizing that the system is morally and intellectually bankrupt. I want to point out two elements of the precision of this language. First of all, this statement does not say that Western civilization in its entirety is intellectually morally bankrupt. It is the system of thought of Western civilization that is bankrupt. Secondly, the word bankrupt does not merely mean that something has no value. It means that it has debts that it cannot repay. Let us quickly note that the House does not deny the benefits given to the world from this worldview, personal freedom, social prosperity, and scientific progress. But by now, these benefits are so far outweighed by the harm that has been wrought, materially and spiritually, that there is no extent of charity or selfless action by the Western nations towards the rest of the world that could ever repay its debts. One example is the myth about how the West grew rich, which we now enforce on the rest of the world through the Washington Consensus. I don't have time to describe this now, but you can read a brief account of this in two posts on my blog, the links to which I copied into the chat at the beginning. But what actually is this system of thought that defines Western civilization? Well, let's turn to Nobel Prize winning economist and hugely influential political theorist, Friedrich Hayek. He wrote, "Individualism, first fully developed during the Renaissance, grew and spread into what we know as Western civilization." You see how he places individualism at the heart of Western civilization. So let's see what the House have to say about individualism from section 8 of Century of Light, in a passage about materialism. Materialism emerged full-blown in the second half of the 20th century as a kind of universal religion. In the absence of conviction about the spiritual nature of reality and the fulfillment it alone offers, it is not surprising to find at the very heart of the current crisis of civilization a cult of individualism. Now, what is individualism? In essence, it is a moral and political philosophy that each individual should be free to do whatever they please, so long as their actions do not infringe on the corresponding rights of others. This is actually logically impossible. Everything we do impacts on others, and the writings talk about the interconnectedness of all created things. But I don't have time to discuss this ideology in detail. There are 3 posts in my blog on this, and the links to that are also in the chat. I do just want to point out that individualism is essentially the philosophy of the sovereignty of the individual, whereas a Baha'i worldview begins with the sovereignty of God, and we are all his servants. In my blog, I argue that the 2 most influential proponents of individualism were Hayek and Milton Friedman, Friedman being unquestionably the most influential economist of the second half of the 20th century, and both very influential on Thatcherism and Reaganomics. These are the long-defunct economists who have deceived the world through their promotion of this ideology. Indeed, individualism merges seamlessly with neoclassical economics, with both proposing individual freedom, unregulated free markets, and small government. Orthodox economics could be, I argue in my blog, it's a bit harsh, it's just a pseudoscience providing a veneer of justification to the dominant political ideology. I leave you to draw your own conclusions about individualism when you've had more time to do your own research. But clearly such research is necessary. How can we ignore what the house state is at the heart of the current crisis of civilization? But let's go back to the original quotation from Century of Light and fill in a sentence I missed out in order to leave the best till last. Here is where the house themselves describe what comprises this system of thought of Western civilization. Philosophically and politically, it presents itself as a kind of liberal relativism, economically and socially as capitalism. Liberal relativism and capitalism. I believe it is fair to say on the basis of this passage that the House are telling us that capitalism is intellectually and morally bankrupt. Now, there's a very useful discussion in Houshman Badi's talk 2 months ago. I think the point was actually made by Richard and strongly supported by Houshman, and we've just referred to it just now, that we should never get involved in a discussion of which is right, capitalism or socialism. The revolutionary social implications of the cause of Baha'u'llah mean that we are here to redefine the very terms, the parameters of the debate. To illustrate how, I want to show you a tool you will find on the internet, the political compass. You answer a series of questions and it places you on this compass. Now, their intentions were good. They felt that simply defining politics in terms of left and right is too simplistic. So they add on a new dimension of authoritarian or libertarian. Unfortunately, it's still too simplistic and they make a complete mess of understanding what the terms left and right actually mean. But there's no time to go into this right now either. The point in this presentation is that even if they were to refine and improve the compass to adequately reflect the current dimensions of political thought, those dimensions are woefully inadequate for humanity. As Baha'is, our job is not to find our place in the existing continuums of political thought. We are here to replace these continuums. This is one of the revolutionary social implications of the cause of Baha'u'llah. It's also what we mean by being in a learning mode if you study books 9 and 10 of the Ruhi Institute. In saying that capitalism is intellectually and morally bankrupt, the House are not saying that therefore the answer is socialism. We should not begin our thinking about the organization of society with the question of who owns the means of production. Whatever answer you come up with, it's the wrong question in the first place. The importance of focusing on capitalism, I suggest, is that capitalism is the dominant ideology in the world at this time. I do also feel it's important to understand the true nature of this deceitful ideology if we're truly to understand this striking statement of the House, but there's no time for that right now. In any case, we understand it in order to resist its dominance. The underpinning beliefs, values, and assumptions of this dominant worldview are being assiduously indoctrinated into all people through the forces of hegemony. As the House said in the 2012 Rizwan message, their hopes founder on erroneous assumptions about human nature that so permeate the structures and traditions of society, of much of present-day living, as to have attained the status of established fact. As Baha'u'llah says, we are here to free humanity from its servitude to the gods of its idle fancies. So what do we replace the political compass with? Here is where the revolution begins. A political compass in which you could map Baha'i belief, would need one access about a belief in the spiritual capacity of all human beings to take charge of the process of their own development if that capacity is released through education. As Century of Light states, throughout history, the masses of humanity have been, at best, spectators at the advances of civilization. Their role has been to serve the designs of whatever elite had temporarily assumed control of the process. Baha'u'llah has come to free humanity from this long bondage, and the closing decades of the 20th century were devoted by the community of his followers to creative experimentation with the means by which his objective can be realized, the Training Institute. The prosecution of the divine plan entails no less than the involvement of the entire body of humankind in the work of its own spiritual, social, and intellectual development. Do we understand that the current plan, that all previous plans, that every effort we have made to serve any of these plans has entailed this purpose? And if not, do we have an adequate understanding of the stupendous significance of Baha'u'llah's revelation, which the Guardian tells us it is our first obligation to obtain? Because what is the challenge for all of us seeking to serve the cause? Is it to attract the attention and interest of others? Is it to learn how to invite people to begin book one? Century of Light tells us what the challenge is. The challenge it poses to everyone who would serve it is to free oneself from attachment to inherited assumptions and preferences that are irreconcilable with the will of God for humanity's coming of age. Your challenge and mine is to free ourselves from the idle fancies and vain imaginings that we have inherited from the society around us. And here some of us at least are in the birthplace of a system of thought that now dominates the world, that the House says intellectually, morally bankrupt. We are totally subsumed in it. How much greater must be the challenge to free ourselves from it? And are the Western Baha'is even aware that this is the challenge they face in seeking to serve the cause? And if not, is this the reason why we're so successful at advancing the process of growth and community building? 12 minutes, 2 paragraphs left. I have studied economics for 8 years in great detail, precisely so that I understand the system of thought that keeps us all prisoner, and so be more able to help others in this liberation from their internal oppression. As a byproduct, I can describe the technical functioning of the economy in microscopic detail, can correlate it to Baha'i teachings, and offer cogent, evidence-based thoughts on how humanity could respond to the current economic crisis. But not in 12 minutes. I tried this morning because I got cold feet about this presentation and tried to do a new one. It takes me about 18 minutes, so I gave up. And hint, it involves a huge role for government and lots of taxing the rich, just as Abdu'l-Baha repeatedly advocated. But the question I've explored in this presentation is far more important. Finally, of all this talk of Western civilization and capitalism being intellectually and morally bankrupt, of you being imprisoned by a bankrupt ideology from which we have all failed to free ourselves, deceived by long-defunct economists, is a bitter pill. I could do no better than close with the reported words of Shoghi Effendi to Rahir Hanoum when she balked at his statement in the Advent to Define Justice that the USA is the most politically corrupt nation in the world. Swallow it. It is good for you.
I thought it was not bitter at all. I thought it was very sweet. You're just saying, forget capitalism, forget socialism. Let's really rethink. Let's go beyond these names and these definitions, and let's put the Baha'i influence into it. So it's actually a very mind-opening presentation. Thank you very much, Bill. You've got a wave of questions coming your way. Joachim.
Yes, thank you, Bill. That was really rich. Thanks a lot. I found that the quadrants with the left, right, and authoritarian, libertarian very interesting. I did that test actually recently, and I'm not going to tell you what the outcome was, but I found it quite interesting. It's very basic, of course. So I was wondering which other continuums you would propose for that kind of quadrant. If you would propose any continuums at all.
I probably wouldn't. I mean, I did mention one in my talk. I say one would have to address this question of recognizing the spiritual capacity of all people. And this is the application, this is the implication of the principle of the oneness of the human race, which you operationalize through the Training Institute. I actually wrote to the Political Compass people a couple of weeks ago. I mean, they said they tend not to reply to emails or read them all, to give them some feedback, because I think actually the way they're defining their continuum is really flawed. But almost we need to avoid from this. Like an obvious continuum will be individualist and collectivist. So we see this as basic distinction between Eastern and Western societies, collectivism and individualism. The Baha'i teachings are at the extreme end of collectivism, unquestionably. It's about self-sacrifice for the common good. I have a dozen quotations out of Baha I didn't have time to share with you on the scene. Yet, it's not one that subjugates the individual. Through this, the true potential and glory of the individual is revealed. So we don't really sit on the continuum at all. We break the continuum. And maybe we need to stop thinking in terms of continuums because they encourage false dichotomies. Should we move on? Just thinking.
Thank you,
Try and get all the questions in.
Kayan at the next question.
Try very quick. You know what? One of the ways into this maybe is the concept of Homo economicus. You know, this highly rational being underlying everything, and it does seem as if there's absolutely zero spiritual dimension to Homo economicus, or even particularly a social aspect. And you know, I'm just wondering, you know, if you were to redefine Homo economicus, what bits would you put in, which maybe is similar to the last question? It's sort of a different way in.
I mean, you start a definition of the human soul that it's a mirror with the capacity to reflect all the names and attributes of God. That's where you start. And the purpose of work is service. So it's good to be self-sufficient. The best of men is he that earns his livelihood from his calling. Baha'is overlook this word. It's from your calling. It's not just get a good job, support yourself, be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, go and get a PhD. It's what's your calling in this world. True reliance, Baha'u'llah says, words of wisdom, is for the servant to pursue his profession and calling in this world. Because it's in our callings we discover our inner talents through which we reflect the names and attributes of God. So it's a complete redefinition of the nature of work and its role in society. And we need this redefinition. This is an activity that needs to go on, and Baha'is need to collaborate with economists in this field to produce this new conception of where we start.
Excellent. Brendan, you have one more question that you wanted to pose? It's actually written in the text, so it's quite, you can actually read through it, but it's maybe you want to share it.
Sure.
Well, it'll be 10 minutes to read it.
So Bill, the government strategy to support the UK economy during COVID-19 has been to calculate that it will cause less debt and less economic damage in the long term to artificially support business and industry with grants and low interest loans now, rather than allowing businesses to fail and supporting the individual through social welfare. Do you feel this current strategy will be an effective one? And if not, what would you do?
I mean, I'm not too keen on saying what I would do because I don't like off-the-shelf armchair manifestos. However, the first thing is the countries that locked down early and locked down hard, New Zealand, South Korea, Vietnam, even China, have suffered the least economic impact. So we're in this mess because of the economic impact. The second thing is, while the government deficit has shot up, the Bank of England has been doing quantitative easing to stop another financial crash. When the Bank of England do quantitative easing, they buy government bonds off the market. So they now own the government debt. But the bank owns the Bank of England, so it owns the money to itself. It cancels the debt. The value of quantitative easing has been greater than the value of government bonds issued in this period. So literally, there has been no increase in the national debt, and these things could be paid for. And what you need is immediate intervention to prop up the economy. You pay for it by monetizing the debt. You pay for it by strengthening the economy, and in the long term, it all comes back to you through taxes. I've posted about this on my blog. But actually, you pay for it by taxing the rich, by taxing wealth. And when I say tax the rich, I mean wealth. What's happened, and you've probably seen the statistics, is that incomes have fallen for the 90% in Britain, and savings have gone down. They're going more into debt. Saving has shot up for the richest 10%, because generally they're still drawing down the same income, but they're not spending money, and the savings have shot up. And we should just step in and tax it. Although the need for a huge overhaul of the tax system is fundamental. We need tax, not so much to pay for government intervention, there's other ways to pay for it. We need tax because these huge inequities of wealth destabilize the economy. Al-Baha says it causes instability. And a brilliant economist called Zoltan Pozsar has done huge analysis of this. Now, he's an analyst at Credit Suisse. He's only interested in how markets work to make money, But his conclusion is that the institutional cash pools running into billions and trillions are destabilizing the economy, and we need to tax them to stop this instability.